My name is Princess Zainab bint Karim al-Sahari, and although I was born into a world that celebrated my lineage, nothing prepared me for the life that began when I turned 15. Until that time, my days were shaped by structured lessons, guarded routines, and the constant presence of supervising eyes. I believed obedience was the only path to honor. I believed silence was a virtue. I believed my future was predetermined for the good of the kingdom, and that my feelings were too insignificant to matter. But the moment my father called me to his council chamber, everything I knew about duty would shift into something far heavier, something that would reshape my womanhood and bind me to years of expectations I could never fully escape. I still remember the scent of incense that morning. The palace corridors had been filled with unusual movement. Women carrying embroidered cloths, guards adjusting their uniforms, and my mother whispering instructions to the attendants as though preparing for a ceremony. I was not told what the occasion was, but I sensed from my mother's unusually firm tone that something important awaited me. She instructed me to wear the deep blue thobe embroidered with silver threads, the one reserved for formal family discussions. My heart trembled as I stepped into the garment, feeling its weight settle across my shoulders like a message I was not yet allowed to read. When I entered my father's council room, I noticed he was not alone. A man stood beside him, broad-shouldered, tall, wrapped in military attire. His posture was rigid, and his eyes held the solemn pride of someone used to command. I had seen him before at palace ceremonies, always surrounded by guards and respected with great enthusiasm by the court. He was Commander Salman al-Hashim, one of the kingdom's most decorated military leaders. The moment I saw him standing beside my father, my breath caught. I was too young to understand politics fully, but even I knew that when such a man stood inside the family council chamber, something irreversible was about to be decided. My father's voice filled the room with authority, letting no emotion slip through. He told me the kingdom was entering a time that required stronger alliances, that certain relationships must be strengthened, and that family honor must be upheld with wisdom. His words were formal, rehearsed, almost detached, but every syllable carried an unspoken truth. Then he told me that my marriage had been arranged. I was to become the wife of Commander Salman. The words settled onto me like stones. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my ears, yet my face remained still, as I had been trained. My mother's eyes watched me from the side, her expression unreadable, silently reminding me to accept without hesitation. At 15, I knew very little of marriage beyond what tradition had taught me. Marriage was an agreement, a bond between families, a tool for political unity, and a symbol of loyalty. Love was not discussed. Desire was not considered. Fear was not acknowledged. A woman's acceptance was assumed, and her feelings were expected to remain hidden. So I bowed my head to my father and uttered the words I had been conditioned to say, "As you command, father." Inside, something fragile cracked, but I ignored it. Obedience, I reminded myself, was honor. The marriage was arranged within weeks. The palace prepared for the ceremony with grandeur. Lanterns lit the corridors, and musicians rehearsed melodies meant to celebrate new beginnings. Yet inside my private chambers, my stomach twisted every night as I tried to prepare myself for a life I did not choose. My attendants bathed me in floral oils, braided my hair with gold threads, and dressed me in garments sewn for queens. They whispered compliments about how fortunate I was to marry a man of such status. But I felt no fortune. The closer the ceremony approached, the more I felt like a young bird being pushed from the nest onto unfamiliar ground. On the day of the wedding, my mother wrapped a veil over my face and told me a story about her own marriage. She said she, too, was young, that she had felt unprepared, but that over time she learned to see her marriage as her duty to her family and her faith. She did not speak of joy. She did not speak of affection. She only spoke of acceptance. And in those moments, I understood that her silence all these years had been protection, not just for me but for herself. She had buried her own desires long ago so that she could survive her role. And now I was expected to do the same. The ceremony passed in a haze. I remember the weight of the henna on my hands, the warmth of the lanterns, the low rumbling prayers of the elders, and the steady murmurs of guests who praised the union. I remember the way Commander Salman stood tall beside me, confident and calm. I remember the words spoken over us about loyalty, obedience, and the honor of building a strong family. My heart beat rapidly under my silk veil, but my face remained composed. When I moved into Commander Salman's household, my life changed overnight. His home was grand but cold, filled with the scent of leather, sandalwood, and metal, a reflection of his military life. I had a separate chamber decorated for me with fine fabrics and gold ornaments, yet there was no warmth in the space. It felt more like a guest room than a home. The commander treated me with respect according to custom, but there was no gentleness in him. He was stern, disciplined, and distant. He spoke to me sparingly, mostly about expectations. He reminded me that my greatest duty was to bear children, to honor his lineage, and to represent my father's name with dignity. I tried to fulfill my responsibilities with patience. But as months passed and no pregnancy occurred, I felt a growing tension around me. In our culture, a woman's fertility often becomes a measure of her worth, and even though I was still a child myself, I felt the weight of every disappointed glance from the commander's relatives. They whispered quietly when they thought I was not listening. I tried to dismiss it, reminding myself that everything happened according to God's timing. Yet I could not deny that the pressure to conceive made me anxious every day. After nearly 2 years, the truth became impossible to ignore. The commander sought medical guidance, and it was discovered that he had a condition preventing him from fathering children. When the news reached his family, their pride trembled. In our society, male infertility was often concealed, spoken of only in guarded rooms. Yet, instead of accepting the truth, the whispers turned toward me. Some suggested I was not trying enough. Others insinuated I might be the cause, ignoring the medical findings. The commander remained composed, but I could sense his pride eroding. He became harsher, more distant, and less patient. Eventually, the decision was made quietly, without public shame. My marriage was annulled under the customary reasoning that a union without the possibility of children could not fulfill its purpose. I was returned to my father's household with the dignity of a princess, but within me, a painful mark remained. I felt broken, as though I had failed even though I knew the truth. My mother received me gently, but even her comfort could not soothe the confusion churning inside me. I was no longer a girl, yet not fully a woman. I was an ex-wife at 17, carrying the silent ache of a marriage that had never given me space to breathe. But there was no time for recovery. The annulment had created a political gap. To repair the alliance, my father sought another match for me. I was given little time to protest. In fact, I did not even know protesting was an option. I had been raised to accept. So when he told me I would marry Judge Hassan al-Najjar, a respected man known for his strict application of law, I bowed my head once again and prepared for another life I did not choose. Judge Hassan was different from Commander Salman, yet equally distant. He was older, by almost 20 years, and carried the air of a man who expected perfection. He spoke gently but firmly, as though every conversation were a lesson. He treated me not as a partner but as a student, constantly reminding me of my duties, my behavior, and my place. Still, he was not unkind. In his own way, he believed he was providing guidance. But guidance without affection feels like correction, and correction without warmth feels like confinement. And that is how I lived in his home, confined by expectations. In his household, fertility was prized even more strongly than in my first marriage. His family had a long history of strong lineage, and they watched me closely, waiting to see if I would prove my worth. And I did. At 18, I conceived my first child, a boy. The relief that washed over the household was immense. I saw joy in their eyes for the first time, and even Judge Hassan softened toward me. For a brief moment, I felt that perhaps I had found a place where I could grow. But the expectation did not stop with one child. Over the next few years, I had more children, 3, then 4, then 5. The judge wanted his lineage to flourish, and I became the vessel through which that hope was realized. Motherhood brought me tenderness and purpose, but it also brought exhaustion. My body grew tired from continuous pregnancies, my nights filled with crying infants, my days with lessons for toddlers. Yet the judge rarely helped. He focused on his work, his cases, and his reputation. I remained in the shadows, doing what was required. Then one day, a shift occurred that once again changed everything. A political conflict emerged between my father and a group of influential families in the outskirts of the kingdom. To prevent tensions from rising, my father needed a stronger alliance with one of the merchant guilds that held great economic power. And so, before I had recovered from the birth of my 5th child, I was summoned back to the palace and informed that a transition was necessary. My marriage to Judge Hassan would be dissolved and replaced with another union that would serve the kingdom's stability. I felt numb when they told me. My children were to remain with their father's family, as custom dictated. I was to leave them behind, though every part of me resisted the thought. But in our tradition, children belong to the father's lineage. I had no say. I held my babies tightly the night before I left, inhaling their scent as though it would sustain me when I could no longer hold them. No words could describe the ache of walking away from them. I felt as though my heart had been taken from my body, leaving me hollow. My next husband, Merchant Farid al-Mansour, was wealthy, influential, and well-respected for his trade routes that connected our kingdom to distant lands. He was younger than Judge Hassan but still older than me by many years. He admired beauty, luxury, and success. His home was filled with silk carpets, exotic spices, rare artifacts, and treasures from across the seas. He treated me like another treasure, a prized possession to be displayed, respected, and admired, but not truly known. With him, the pressure to bear children intensified. In his family, prosperity was believed to be directly linked to lineage. A man with many children was considered blessed, favored, and strong. And so I once again became a mother, again and again. With Merchant Farid, I had 6 children, each bringing both joy and sorrow. Joy because they were innocent and precious. Sorrow because with every child, I felt myself fading more into a role I never had the strength to question. Yet even with 6 children, I was not enough for him. He wanted more, always more trade, more wealth, more influence, more children. And eventually, his ambitions began to outweigh the alliance my marriage provided. When he formed new connections that no longer required my father's support, the value of our union diminished. And once again, my marriage dissolved, not through scandal, but through political redirection. I returned to the palace, now a mother of 11 children, yet barren of my own freedom. The years had hardened me. I no longer believed my life was my own. I no longer expected affection. I no longer hoped for rest. I simply existed within the pattern set for me: marriage, childbearing, separation, silence, and obedience. But my father had one more plan for me, one final alliance he believed would secure the kingdom's spiritual influence. And that is how, in my mid-20s, I was married to Sheikh Umar al-Rashidi, a scholar of Islamic theology renowned for his strict adherence to tradition. He was respected, disciplined, and deeply committed to preserving the teachings he believed in. Yet living in his household was unlike anything I had experienced. He held high expectations for modesty, silence, and obedience. He believed a woman's primary purpose was to raise children, maintain the household, and support her husband's mission. Under Sheikh Umar, I bore 7 more children. 18 in total across my marriages. 18 beautiful souls brought into the world through pain, hope, exhaustion, and sacrifice. I loved each one of them more deeply than words could ever express. But motherhood became my identity, my burden, and my duty. I was never seen as a woman with dreams, thoughts, or desires. I was a mother first, a political tool second, a human being last. By the time I reached the end of my fourth marriage, I felt as though I had lived several lifetimes. Each marriage had taken a piece of me. Each childbirth had reshaped my body. Each separation had broken my heart. Each alliance had reminded me that my life was never mine to determine. I had obeyed every command, fulfilled every duty, and carried every expectation. Yet I was still unseen, still unheard, still longing for something I could not name. I gave everything, my youth, my strength, my body, my voice. And yet it was never enough. The more I gave, the more was demanded. The more I endured, the more I was pushed. I felt like a vessel emptied over and over again, with no one stopping to ask whether anything remained inside. Little did I know that the emptiness I carried would become the space where a new truth would enter my life, a truth that would overturn everything I had ever believed and lead me toward a freedom I never thought possible. My journey was far from over. In fact, the most transformative part of my story had not yet begun. Judge Karim believed that a wife should be calm, disciplined, and predictable. He never raised his voice at me, but he also never reached for my hand, never asked if I was happy, never spoke to me like a companion. His world was made of rules, books, and obligations. I tried to adapt. I woke before dawn to prepare his tea the way he liked it. I memorized the parts of fiqh he said every woman should know. I sat beside him quietly when guests visited, only speaking when he directed a question to me. When I finally conceived, the entire household celebrated, and for the first time in many months, I felt useful and seen. When my first child, a son, was born, the judge lifted him proudly, reciting blessings while I lay exhausted, but grateful that I had fulfilled what was expected of me. Then came another child, and another, each treated as a blessing from Allah and a symbol of a strong household. But after 5 children, the judge's family began to pressure him to take a second wife, one who could strengthen other alliances. Even though I had given him more than many wives, I could feel myself being quietly pushed aside. It began with small things, fewer conversations, less time spent together, decisions made without me. One evening, he sat across from me with the calmness of someone discussing court matters, not marriage. He told me that my father had agreed to a dissolution, and that this would serve both families well. I felt no anger, just an emptiness that spread slowly through me. I gathered my children, kissed each of their heads, and prepared to return to my father's palace once more. My father welcomed me with formality, not tenderness. He said I had done well, and that alliances sometimes shift for reasons beyond us. Within months, I was given again in marriage, this time to a wealthy merchant named Yusuf al-Rahmani. He was younger than my previous husbands and known for his generosity, but I quickly learned that his generosity was mostly for the world outside his home. With his customers, his business partners, and the poor, he was warm and giving. With me, he was expectant, focused, and often absent. He wanted many children, not for political reasons, but because large families were a symbol of honor in his tribe. I became pregnant repeatedly, and each child was welcomed with feasts and celebrations. The home was always full, always noisy, always overflowing with relatives and visitors. But despite all the life around me, I felt alone. Yusuf was rarely home, and when he was, he spent most of his time discussing trade, caravans, and investments. I had become the pillar of the household. Raising children, teaching them manners, preparing their lessons, ensuring each one followed the customs of modesty and respect. By the time my 9th child was born, I rarely had a moment to rest. Instead of being praised, I found myself being criticized by some of his extended family who said the children were too loud, or that I should have more control over them, or that perhaps another wife would help balance their responsibilities. Their words stung, especially after I had given everything to that family. Eventually, the conversation shifted. Yusuf's business was expanding, and he wanted to marry another woman from a tribe that could expand his trade connections. My presence no longer served the same purpose. When the separation was arranged, he thanked me for giving him so many children, but his words felt empty, like the polite closing of a transaction. Returning to the palace a third time was harder than the first two. The servants whispered more openly. My younger cousins watched me with wide, confused eyes. Some wondered if I had done something wrong, but none dared to ask. I kept my head high, but inside, I felt fractured. I had 12 children by then. A woman with 12 children was usually respected, honored, and seen as blessed. Yet here I was, being sent back again, to be handed off again. My fourth marriage was to Sheikh Hamdan, a tribal chief known for his strict leadership and deep knowledge of religion. He was respected across many regions and seen as a man of fairness, but fairness does not always equal gentleness. In his home, every member of the household knew their exact place. His words were followed without question. I was not unhappy, but I was not free. He treated me as a responsibility, a part of the structure that held his tribe together. He told me early on that my main duty was to strengthen his bloodline. I accepted this silently, repeating the same pattern my life had followed since I was 15. Child after child came, until I lost count of the months I spent pregnant. Some births were easy, others left me weak for weeks. But every time, I was expected to stand again, prepare the home again, and meet expectations again. When I reached my 18th child, an exhaustion settled into me that no amount of rest could cure. My body felt as though it belonged to everyone except me, my father, my husbands, my children, my culture. I had given everything expected of me, everything asked of me, and still I lived in a world where I could be dismissed at any moment if it served someone else's purpose. The dissolution of my fourth marriage happened quietly, respectfully, just like the others. The sheikh said it was best for the tribe, and my father agreed. I did not even cry. I simply nodded, packed my things, and prepared once more to return to the palace with the weight of 18 children following behind me like a long shadow. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. People called me strong, dutiful, and blessed. But deep inside, I felt hollow. I had fulfilled every role I was given, but none of those roles ever allowed me to ask what I wanted, what I felt, or who I truly was. And yet, through all of this, I still believed that obedience, patience, and sacrifice were the path Allah wanted from me. I believed that someday, all the suffering would make sense, that all the emptiness in my heart would be filled with peace. I waited, year after year, but the peace never came. Instead, the feeling of being unseen grew stronger. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder silently, just in the privacy of my own mind. If there was more to life than repeating the same cycle of duty and silence. I wondered if there was a kind of love that did not depend on alliances, usefulness, or bloodlines. I wondered if God saw me, or if I was simply another name in a long line of royal daughters expected to serve a purpose and disappear. I did not speak these thoughts aloud, but they lived inside me like a quiet ache I could no longer ignore. The years of bearing and raising 18 children passed over me like a desert storm, loud, heavy, and leaving my heart covered in dust I could never quite wipe away. I did not plan for 18 children, I simply lived within the expectations set for me, and every time I gave birth, another expectation followed immediately. With my first pregnancy, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. I wanted to be a good mother, the kind who could give her child stability and warmth. But my pregnancies never happened in calm circumstances. They happened within the pressure of pleasing husbands, pleasing families, and holding together alliances I barely understood. I remember the early months of each pregnancy, the nausea, the heaviness in my legs, the feeling that my body was no longer my own. Yet the people around me praised me constantly, saying a woman who carried many children was blessed, honored, and chosen by Allah to continue noble bloodlines. Their words were supposed to comfort me, but instead they felt like reminders that my worth came from how many children I could bring into the world. My first labor lasted almost a full day. I was young, scared, and surrounded by midwives who kept telling me to breathe and trust Allah. I held tightly to the wooden edges of the birthing bed, praying silently with every contraction. When my son finally came out crying, they placed him on my chest, and I felt my heart overflow. Even though I was exhausted and trembling, I stared at him for a long time, unable to believe I had brought life into the world. I thought that moment would change everything, that his father would look at me differently, that I would feel truly valued. But only a day later, I was being taught duties again, told how quickly a mother should recover, and reminded that a royal wife must return to her responsibilities without complaint. My rest lasted barely a week before I was expected to stand, walk, attend visitors, and organize my household. Then, not long. The days after my 18th child's birth felt heavy in a way I had never experienced before. My body was still weak, my mind clouded, and my heart weighed down with a sadness I did not know how to name. But even in that fragile state, the expectations around me did not soften. The servants entered my room as usual, adjusting curtains, pouring tea, arranging cushions, reminding me of the household duties that would soon return to me. They moved with practiced routine, unaware that inside my chest something was shifting quietly, like a deep ache that refused to settle. I wanted to tell someone that I needed more time, that I felt stretched too thin, that the weight of 18 children and 4 marriages had pressed something inside me until it cracked. But I had learned long ago that a royal woman is expected to appear composed at all times. Our tears were to be kept private, our fears tucked away beneath polite smiles, our exhaustion spoken only to Allah. So I swallowed my pain and nodded when they spoke to me. I told them I was fine even though I felt anything but fine. In our culture, women were taught from childhood to hold their emotions inside. Expressing sadness too openly was seen as a sign of ingratitude, and questioning one's life was considered weakness or a lack of faith. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, older women reminded me that paradise was promised to those who endured with patience. So I tried to keep myself silent, believing that patience meant swallowing the tears burning in my eyes. When I prayed, I asked Allah to strengthen me, to make me grateful, to help me be the mother and daughter and wife everyone expected me to be. But sometimes the prayers felt heavy in my mouth, as if I were speaking words that no longer belonged to my heart. I feared admitting that aloud because in my world, even the hint of spiritual weariness could be misunderstood. We were taught that questioning was the first step toward disobedience, and disobedience was the first step toward spiritual failure. So I learned to question myself instead, asking if perhaps I was the problem, if I simply needed more faith, if the emptiness inside me was a punishment for not being strong enough. But the emptiness did not leave. It grew. I began to notice things I had ignored for years. I saw how men in my life lived with freedoms I could never imagine. They could express anger without judgment, travel without permission, make decisions without explanation, and pursue their desires openly. They could take comfort when they needed it, nap when they felt tired, walk outside for fresh air, speak their minds, or choose silence without being questioned. Their prayers were praised when they were long, and excused when they were short. Their failures were softened with understanding. Their mistakes were dismissed as human nature. Meanwhile, women were expected to serve silently, forgive quickly, endure endlessly, and carry responsibilities that stretched far beyond their bodies' limits. When men were tired, others stepped in to lighten their burdens. When women were tired, they were told to pray more. I watched this imbalance unfold around me day after day, and it began to trouble me in ways I could no longer ignore. I asked myself quietly why a woman who served with all her strength was still expected to do more. Why was her sadness seen as weakness? Why was her exhaustion dismissed as normal? Why her desires were treated as secondary to the desires of the men around her? These questions lived inside me like whispers I was afraid to hear, whispers I pushed back with more prayers and more silence. But the whispers returned each time I saw something that did not align with what my heart believed God should want. One evening, after putting several of my children to sleep, I sat alone in the corner of my room with only the small lantern burning beside me. The palace was quiet, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe slowly. I leaned my head against the cold wall and closed my eyes. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it away quickly, out of habit, as if someone might enter and accuse me of complaining. That was when a thought surfaced so clearly that I could not push it away. Is this truly what God wants from me? The question frightened me. It felt like stepping into unknown territory, dangerous, unfamiliar, forbidden. I had been taught that doubt was wrong, that questioning was wrong, that my heart should submit completely even when I felt broken. But my heart refused to stay silent. Something deep inside me insisted that a creator who formed my soul could not desire my suffering. A creator who shaped my children with tenderness would not demand that I destroy myself to raise them. A creator who saw every tear could not ignore the ones I cried alone. Still, I feared expressing this aloud. So I kept it hidden, locked away behind the polite smile I showed everyone. During that time, I found myself drawn to something I had always been warned against. Poetry that spoke openly about sorrow, longing, and the weight of life. In my household, such writings were considered distractions that could weaken faith or stir emotions that should remain controlled. But one afternoon, while sorting through old belongings from my childhood, I found a small, worn notebook tucked between embroidered scarves. It belonged to my mother's younger sister, who had passed away when I was little. She loved poetry deeply. Inside the book were lines written in her handwriting, lines about women who carried too much, about hearts that loved silently, about wounds that healed slowly. I knew I should close the book. I knew I should return it to the chest and erase the temptation. But my hands refused to move. I read for a long time, letting each line settle into me like rain on dry earth. There was one line I read again and again: a woman's tears are seen by God even when hidden from the world. Those words touched a place inside me that had long been ignored. For the first time, I felt understood, not by a person, but by something deeper. The poem spoke of pain without shame, of longing without guilt, of questioning without fear. They made me realize how much of myself I had buried. And even though I felt guilty for reading something forbidden in my home, I could not stop. Every chance I had, I returned to the notebook, reading quietly in the dim light, letting the words comfort me in ways nothing else had. The more I read, the more my heart softened. And the softer my heart became, the more aware I was of the heaviness inside me. I began noticing how often I forced smiles for my children so they wouldn't worry. How often I nodded politely even when my mind was full of unspoken questions. How often I hid my trembling hands when I was too tired to continue. How often I prayed while feeling completely alone. It hurt me to admit these things to myself. I had always wanted to be strong, to be a mother my children admired, to be a woman who honored her culture. But quietly, beneath all that, I wanted something else too: peace. And peace felt farther from me than ever. Whenever I tried to share a small piece of my feelings with other women, my sisters, my cousins, the wives of my relatives, their responses followed the same pattern. They told me to endure. They told me not to question. They told me my reward would come in the next life, even if this life was hard. But they never asked if the weight was too much for me. They never asked if my heart was hurting. So I stopped trying to speak altogether. Instead, I learned to hide everything behind carefully composed expressions. I walked through the palace with my back straight and my steps steady, but inside, I felt like a person losing her footing. The contradictions around me became clearer with each passing day. Men could remarry easily, but women were judged for returning home after a dissolution. Men could show frustration openly, but women were told to breathe through theirs quietly. Men were praised for providing, even if they rarely spent time with their families, while women were expected to nurture constantly, even when they were breaking. I saw all these things, and though I tried to ignore them, they carved deeper questions in my mind. If God created both men and women with equal care, why did the world treat them so differently? Why did the expectations placed on women stretch beyond what any human heart could carry? Why did the rules always seem to favor one side? These questions filled me with guilt. I feared that questioning meant I lacked faith. So every night, I begged Allah to forgive me for thoughts I could not control. One night, after putting my youngest to sleep, I sat alone again with the poetry notebook open across my knees. I traced the handwriting with my fingers, feeling something warm and unfamiliar stir inside me, a longing not just for peace, but for truth. Something real. Something that spoke directly to my heart instead of to the expectations around me. I whispered aloud to the empty room, "Is this really what God wants from me?" My voice was so soft I barely heard it myself. Yet the moment those words escaped my lips, I felt something shift in the air. It was not loud. It was not sudden. It was simply a feeling, a quiet sense that for the first time, I had spoken honestly to myself. I did not know then that this question would become the seed of a journey that changed everything. I only knew that silence no longer felt like obedience. It felt like a slow fading of my soul. And I could no longer bear to fade. I did not know the human heart could grow quiet even while still beating. There were days when I moved through my home like a shadow stitched to the walls, present but unseen, breathing but unheard. My life had become a collection of duties strung together like prayer beads: cook, teach, nurse, guide, correct, soothe, pray, clean, and then, start again. And yet, I carried out those responsibilities silently, because silence was expected. A woman's sigh was considered a sign of weakness, her tears a sign of poor faith. So I hid everything inside me like someone hiding a flame in a jar, hoping no one would see the smoke. It was during this time that grief entered my life with a weight that bent me into someone I no longer recognized. 4 of my children, 4 pieces of my heart, were taken from me in ways I still cannot fully speak about without my voice trembling. Their lives slipped away as quietly as dawn fading into day, and their absence tore open a space inside me that nothing could ever fill again. One died from a fever that came fast and unexpectedly. One from complications after birth that even the midwives could not explain. Another from an accident in the courtyard, a moment that replays in my mind like a punishment. And the last, a daughter, simply did not wake up one morning. I shook her gently, then harder, my heart pounding with the force of a storm, until one of my co-wives entered the room and placed a hand on my shoulder. No scream came out of me. Only silence. A silence that felt like it wrapped around my bones and pressed inward. In our custom, women are expected to show strength, not sorrow. A tearful mother is whispered about. A grieving mother is told to increase her prayers. A questioning mother is told that her sorrow is a test of obedience. So even as my heart cracked open again and again, I folded my grief into myself like cloth, keeping it hidden under layers of routine. When I was told to prepare food, I cooked. When I was told to welcome guests, I smiled politely. When I was told to appear, I appeared. And all the while, my children, my 4 children, were gone. The world around me moved forward while I was trapped in the moment of losing them. The pressure to remain composed made everything heavier. I felt as if I were walking with sandbags tied to my wrists and ankles, trying to appear graceful despite sinking deeper with every step. At night, when the house grew quiet, I would sit by the window and whisper their names, one by one, letting my breath carry them into the darkness. I knew no one would hear me there. I knew no one would ask why my eyes were swollen. And in those moments, for a few short breaths, I felt the smallest measure of relief simply because I did not have to hide the truth of my pain from myself. But even that small refuge did not last. Once, my second husband heard me crying behind a closed door and gently reminded me that patience in hardship was expected, that Allah loves the women who endure in silence. His words were meant to comfort me, but instead they pressed down on me like another stone added to the pile already on my chest. I wanted to tell him that patience was all I had been living on, that silence had become the language I spoke most fluently, but the words never left my mouth. I swallowed them like I had swallowed every other protest I ever felt. Something inside me began to change after the fourth child's death. Questions arose in me quietly, like birds fluttering under the surface of water. Why do mothers carry so much grief alone? Why must a woman's tears be hidden while a man's frustrations are spoken loudly and freely? Why must I carry all this pain silently and still be told it is not enough? Why must I be grateful even when my womb feels empty and my soul feels worn to threads? These questions frightened me because even thinking about them felt like wrongdoing. Every time my heart whispered to them, another voice, trained into me from childhood, answered, "You must not question." And so the war in me grew, one side aching, the other scolding. One side grieving, the other accusing. One side longing for air, the other insisting that only stillness was allowed. To keep myself from drowning, I started doing something I had never dared before. I began secretly reading poetry. Not the classical Arabic poetry approved and taught by scholars, but hidden verses women in the palace whispered about, a collection of lines describing sorrow, longing, and heartache. The poems were said to weaken the discipline of the heart, which is why they were forbidden in our household. But for me, they became the first gentle touch my soul had felt in years. Every poem felt like a mirror. Every verse felt like someone reaching out to say, "I see you." And I needed to be seen more than I had ever admitted. I hid the poetry book in the folds of my garments. Sometimes I read while pretending to mend clothes. Sometimes I read while breastfeeding my youngest. Sometimes I read in the dim light of dawn before anyone else woke. I memorized lines the way I once memorized verses of the Quran, letting them echo in me long after I closed the pages. And although I feared discovery, I could not let go of the comfort these words gave me. They were the only place where my pain felt allowed. The more I read, the more I realized how much I had never dared to feel. It was like opening a window in a room that had been locked for years. The air that came in was unfamiliar and a little frightening, but it carried something my heart had been starved for, honesty. Despite all this, I tried to maintain my responsibilities. I still taught my children their prayers. I still observed every rule of modesty. I still served my husbands with respect. But inside me, a quiet trembling grew. It was not a rebellion. It was not anger. It was simply the weight of years, years of giving, birthing, losing, obeying, enduring. Years of loving children who were taken from me without explanation. Years of carrying emotions I was never allowed to speak. I felt like a clay pot filled beyond its capacity, one more drop and I feared I would crack. Yet I continued to move, continued to serve, continued to present myself as the dutiful wife and mother. That was what everyone saw. But inside, the emptiness spread like a silent tide. Some nights, when the house slept, I walked through the rooms quietly, touching the things my children once touched, a wooden toy carved by a craftsman, a small sandal, a worn blanket, a comb missing 2 teeth. I held these objects with trembling hands and whispered apologies I knew my children could no longer hear. I apologized for not being able to protect them. For not being strong enough to challenge the customs that forced me to divide myself between so many households. For not being the mother I wished I could be. Every apology broke me a little more. I tried to pray harder. I prayed until my forehead felt bruised, until my knees ached, until my breath shook with effort. But sometimes my prayers felt like they floated upward and then fell back on me, unanswered. And that made me feel guilty. In my world, women were taught that if they felt distant from God, the fault was always theirs. So I blamed myself. I thought maybe I had displeased him somehow. Maybe my sorrow was a punishment. Maybe my questions were proof of my weakness. Still, something in me kept whispering, is this truly what the Creator desires for women? This silence? This burden? This fear? The questions frightened me, yet they would not go away. They lived at the edges of my thoughts, flickering like small lights trying to break through the dark. I was surrounded by people, children, co-wives, servants, relatives, yet I felt alone in a way I could not explain to anyone. And even if I tried, I knew the response would be the same: pray more. Endure more. Speak less. Complaint never. Trust always. Everything happens by decree. But my heart was tired. Tired of burying my own feelings. Tired of losing children I loved more than my own life. Tired of pretending that nothing inside me was breaking. Tired of believing that silence was the only acceptable language for women. The truth was, I was becoming someone I did not know. Someone fragile, someone grieving, someone questioning. And although I did not yet understand it, I was also becoming someone who would soon be found. Someone who would soon be seen. Someone who would soon encounter a love unlike anything she had ever known. But at this stage in my life, I could not see what was coming. All I could see was the emptiness inside me and the questions rising like waves I could no longer push down. I stood between grief and duty, between silence and longing, between who I was expected to be and who I was quietly becoming. It was the loneliest place I had ever stood. And it was there, in that quiet, aching place, that everything in me began to shift. I remember the night my life changed in a way I never expected. It was a night that began like any other, with my children settled on their mats, my household finally quiet, and the desert wind brushing softly against the walls of my room. But inside me, something felt unsettled. My body felt hot and heavy, as if a fire had been lit beneath my skin. At first, I thought it was only exhaustion, the kind that had been building for years without relief. But soon my limbs grew weak, and a wave of fever rushed through me so suddenly that I could barely keep myself upright. I tried to call for one of the women in the house, but my voice came out too soft, barely above a whisper. It was as though the fever had wrapped its fingers around my throat as well. My head began to spin, and the room around me blurred at the edges, tilting in a way that made everything feel distant. I lay down, hoping the wave of heat would pass. But it only grew stronger. Sweat gathered on my forehead, my vision swam, and my breathing grew shallow. I remember pressing my palm to my chest, feeling my heartbeat thudding like it wanted to leap out of me. The last thing I recall before slipping out of consciousness was thinking that I might not wake again. And for the first time in my life, I did not fear that possibility. Grief had taken so much from me that even the thought of death felt like a kind of rest. Then suddenly the darkness around me shifted, and I was no longer in my room. I found myself standing in the middle of a wide, barren desert. The sky above me was dark, not with night but with a storm gathering so quickly that it looked like the clouds were being pulled across the sky by invisible hands. The wind whipped across the sand, lifting the ground into spiraling walls around me. My garments snapped against my legs, and grains of sand stung my face, making it hard to keep my eyes open. Yet somehow, I knew I was not dreaming in the usual sense. I felt too aware, too present. It was as though I had stepped out of one world and into another, something between life and death, between earth and spirit. The storm grew louder, rising with a howl that reminded me of 1,000 voices crying at once. The wind pushed against me so strongly that I struggled to take even one step forward. But far ahead, through the rushing sand, I could see a faint light. It was soft at first, almost swallowed by the storm, but as I strained my eyes, it grew brighter. My heart quickened, not out of fear but out of something else, something I could not name then. With effort, I moved toward the light. Every step felt heavy, as if the sand were pulling me down. My breath came in short bursts, and the storm only seemed to tighten around me. The more I walked, the stronger the storm became, pressing against me as though trying to push me back. My garments flapped wildly, and sand filled my mouth when I tried to breathe through my lips. I covered my face with my arm and kept moving, drawn to the light ahead. As I walked, I began to hear something. Not the roar of the storm. Not the scrape of sand. Something deeper. A voice. A steady, calm voice cutting through the chaos. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, shaping sounds into something familiar. But the closer I moved toward the light, the clearer the voice became, and I realized with a jolt, it was calling my name. Zainab. I froze. My heart lurched, and I felt my knees weaken. The voice was unlike any I had ever heard. It was not loud, yet it carried with a strength that seemed to reach directly into me, as though it came from everywhere at once, from the sky, from the sand, from the air around me. It was gentle yet firm, tender yet powerful, speaking my name with a warmth that cracked something open inside my chest. My throat tightened, and tears gathered in my eyes before I could stop them. No one had spoken my name like that in years. Not with that kind of tenderness. Not with that kind of certainty. I stumbled forward, driven by a need I could not explain. As the light grew brighter, the storm lifted slightly, enough for me to see ahead. There, standing near a wide pool of still water, water unlike anything I had ever seen in the desert, was a man clothed entirely in white. His garments shifted around him not with the storm but with a kind of peace that made the air near him look untouched. His presence made the wind slow as if even the storm recognized him. My breath caught in my throat. I could not move. I could not speak. My entire being felt suspended between awe and trembling. He stood near the water with one hand gently extended toward me. His face was radiant, not with the harsh brightness of the sun but with a soft, living light. His eyes held a depth I cannot describe, a familiarity that made my heart ache, as though he had known me long before I ever existed. Again, he called my name. Zainab. It was the same voice, steady, warm, filled with a tenderness that felt like healing in itself. You are mine. Come to me. When those words reached me, my legs gave way beneath me. Tears streamed down my face without restraint. I felt exposed, seen, understood in a way that no one in my life had ever seen me, not my husbands, not my parents, not even the midwives who held my hands through childbirth. This man, this luminous presence, spoke to me with a love I had only ever longed for in silence. Every memory of my suffering came rushing back all at once. The children I lost, the nights I cried alone, the weight of my duties, the ache of being unheard, the exhaustion that had drained me to nothing. And yet, in his voice, none of that felt shameful. It felt like something he already knew intimately, something he had watched me endure without looking away. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob left my lips. My body shook with a mixture of fear, hope, and something deeper, something that felt like recognition. The storm around me rose sharply, as if furious that I had moved toward him. Sand whipped across my skin again, and the sky thundered overhead. The water behind him remained still. Perfectly still. As though protected by his presence alone. He took one step toward me. And the moment his foot touched the sand, the entire storm halted. The wind stopped mid-rush. The sand fell straight to the ground. The sky cleared of darkness. In a breath, chaos became peace. It was as if the desert itself bowed to him. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. My heart thudded with such force that I thought it might burst. The silence after the storm was so complete, so pure, that I could hear my own breath trembling. He extended his hand toward me again. Not forcing. Not demanding. Simply inviting. His eyes held mine, and in them I saw a depth of compassion that pierced through every wound I had carried in secret. "Come," he said softly. "I am with you." My chest tightened, and something inside me broke open completely. A long-buried longing surged through me, an ache for peace, for love, for rest, for truth. I reached out with a shaking hand. My fingers touched his. The moment our hands met, warmth flooded through me, gentle, complete, filling every part of me that had been cold with sorrow. The warmth spread through my arms, my chest, my head, even down to my feet. It was not hot like fire. It was not the fever that had overwhelmed me before. It was peace, living, breathing peace, so strong I could barely hold myself upright. My tears fell like rain. I could not stop them. And he did not ask me to. In that instant, I felt everything inside me settle. The ache, the questions, the grief, none disappeared, but they were held by a presence greater than my suffering. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. Then, in a single blink, the desert faded around me, and I gasped awake. I was back in my room. The fever was gone. Completely gone. My body felt strong, lighter than it had in years. The weakness had disappeared as though it had never existed. I sat up slowly, breathless, my hand still tingling where I had touched him. My forehead was cool, my limbs steady. And in my chest, where the emptiness had lived for so long, there was a peace so deep, so gentle, that I placed my hand over my heart to feel it again. I knew, without doubt, that what I had seen was real. I knew the man in white was real. And I knew that my life would never, could never, be the same again. After the night of the vision, I moved through the palace with a changed heart hidden beneath calm expressions. No one could see what had happened inside me. No one knew the storm I had walked through or the peace that had settled into my bones. Outwardly, I looked the same, still the obedient royal daughter, the mother, the wife. But inside, I felt like a person quietly carrying a secret that was both fragile and powerful at the same time. For days I could not speak of what I saw. My tongue felt tied by caution, and my thoughts were too sacred to share with anyone around me. I spent hours recalling every detail, the still water, the desert, the warmth in his eyes, the way he said my name. I replayed his voice in my mind over and over until I could almost hear it when I closed my eyes. Each memory felt like a thread pulling me away from the life I had known and toward something new, something I did not yet understand. But the more I held the memory inside me, the more a quiet hunger grew. I needed to know who he was. I needed to understand why he came to me. I needed answers that no one in my household could ever give. And I knew exactly who I could speak to, the one person in the palace whose eyes had always held a kindness I could not explain, an older Christian woman who cleaned the outer halls. Her name was Miriam, and though she spoke little, her presence had always brought a strange peace whenever she passed by. I approached her one afternoon when the corridor was empty, and the sound of footsteps echoed far off in the distance. She startled when she saw me, bowing quickly, not expecting the princess to speak to her. I assured her gently that I did not seek to reprimand her. My voice shook as I asked the question that had been pressing on my heart since the vision. "Miriam, does your faith believe that God speaks through visions?" She looked up slowly, and her expression softened in a way that made my chest tighten. She did not look afraid or surprised. Instead, she looked as if she had been waiting for someone to ask her that exact question. She nodded with a calm certainty. "Yes, my lady. God can speak in many ways. In dreams. In visions. Through his Son." Her words stirred something deep inside me. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to tell her everything. But I wasn't ready, not completely. Instead, I asked a safer question. "In your books, does your Jesus ever appear in storms?" Or speak to people in times of trouble? Miriam's eyes widened, and she held her breath for a moment before answering. Yes, she whispered. There is a story written about him calming the sea. His followers were afraid during a violent storm, but when he spoke, the wind and waves obeyed him. My knees weakened. My breath caught in my throat. I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath me. A storm. His voice. His presence. Peace is coming instantly. My heart began racing. What did he say to them? I asked in a trembling voice. She hesitated for a moment, almost as if sensing the weight of my question, then softly replied. He asked why they doubted. And he showed them that even the storm listened to him. Her words poured over me like water. The memory of the desert storm returned, the way it stopped the moment he moved. The still water behind him. The peace that had replaced chaos. Miriam watched my face closely, as if reading a story written beneath my skin. But she did not pry. Instead, she pulled something small from her apron, a book wrapped in old cloth. She held it out carefully, almost fearfully. My lady, this is the Gospel of John. In Arabic. If you want to know more, read this quietly. No one must see it. My fingers shook as I accepted it. The cloth felt warm from her hands. I thanked her in a whisper, afraid that even the walls might hear. That night, after the palace had gone silent and my children were asleep, I lit a small lamp with trembling hands and sat in the corner of my room. My heart pounded in my chest as I unwrapped the cloth and held the book for the first time. It felt heavier than I expected, as though it carried something beyond ink and paper. I opened it slowly. The first lines drew me in like a breath I had been aching to take. I read each sentence with a hunger that frightened me. The words felt alive, as though they were speaking directly into the hollow spaces inside me. They did not feel foreign. They did not feel strange. They felt familiar, like something I had always known but had forgotten. Hour after hour, I read without stopping, my lamp casting a soft glow across the pages. Every verse seemed to echo the vision I had seen. Every line spoke of light, of truth, of someone who brought peace where there was no peace. I read about the one who called himself the living water. The one who healed the broken. The one who knew people before they spoke a word. And then I reached the verse that shattered me completely. Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. My breath left my body in a shaky gasp. Tears filled my eyes instantly. I pressed the page against my chest, unable to stop myself from sobbing. It felt as though the words had been written for me alone. Every moment of exhaustion, every loss, every silent cry I had hidden, those words gathered all of them and held them gently. I whispered into the dimly lit room, my voice cracking. This is him, this is the one I saw. The man in white. The voice in the storm. The peace that filled me when I touched his hand. Everything aligned. Everything made sense. I stayed awake long into the night, reading until my eyes were too heavy to stay open. But even when I closed them, I felt him near, closer than breath, closer than thought. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be seen completely. Loved completely. Known completely. And I knew that my secret search had only just begun. My heart was moving in a direction I could never turn back from, even if I wanted to. Something inside me had awakened, and no rule, no tradition, no fear could silence it again. I had found the one who calmed my storm. And now, I needed to know everything about him. I never imagined that the moment which would change my entire life would happen in a silence so soft, so still, that even the walls of my room seemed to hold their breath. For years, every prayer I had ever performed was spoken aloud, recited word for word, ritual after ritual, movement after movement. I had bowed because I was taught to bow. I had whispered memorized verses because they were expected of me. I had washed my hands, my face, my feet, countless times, believing that the water could somehow cleanse everything I could not speak of. But that night, for the first time in my life, I prayed with nothing but the raw voice inside my own chest. No recitations. No rituals. No rulebook. Only my heart, trembling, as if it had been waiting all my life to speak. The moment began quietly. I was sitting on the floor of my room, the same place where I had paced countless nights worrying about my children, wondering whether they were safe, whether they would grow up knowing love or only discipline. The same room where I had cried silently so no one could hear, where I had pressed my fist into my mouth so the sound would not escape, where I had begged God to give me strength because I had no strength left of my own. But this night felt different from the beginning. For the first time in years, my hands were not shaking. My breath was not tight. My body did not feel heavy with fear. Ever since the vision, ever since the man in white called my name and stilled the storm around me, something inside me had softened in a way that frightened me and comforted me at the same time. I kept hearing his voice. Not loud, not dramatic, not forceful. Just a steady whisper that echoed inside me, "Zainab, you are mine. Come to me." Those words had stayed with me like a flame that refused to die, no matter how much darkness pressed against it. They had followed me as I walked through the palace halls pretending to be the calm, obedient princess everyone wanted me to be. They followed me as I sat with my children, holding their small hands and trying to smile as though my heart wasn't breaking every day. They followed me through the endless duties, the expectations, the quiet suffering that had become my daily companion. And all the while, I kept asking myself, who was he? Why did he call me his? Why did peace come only when I thought of him? It took me days to gather the courage to ask anyone anything. I knew that even a wrong question could ruin a woman's life in my world. But the longing inside me overpowered my fear. When I asked the Christian maid about visions, and she told me about Jesus calming the storm, something inside me broke open. As if someone had whispered to my soul, "This is the one you saw." And when she slipped me the worn Arabic Gospel of John, my hands had trembled as I held it, not with fear, but with a strange, almost electric sense of belonging. Every verse felt like it was written for me, as though someone had reached into my life and written down the very thoughts I was too afraid to admit. But the words that took my breath away were the ones that said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I had never felt rested. Not since I was a child. Not since my life had been handed from one man to another like a treaty to be signed. Not since I had buried my children and felt a part of myself lowered into the earth with them. But here, in these forbidden pages, was someone saying I could rest. Someone saying I could come. Someone calling me daughter, not a burden. By the time I reached the second night of reading, I could no longer hold myself together. I tried to sit normally, my back straight, my expression composed, like the princess I was raised to be. But the words kept breaking me open. Eventually, I let the book fall beside me on the rug, pressed my hands over my face, and finally allowed the tears to fall. They came slowly at first, like they were afraid to leave my eyes, as though even my tears had been trained to be silent. But once the first few escaped, the others followed forcefully, until I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. I cried for the girl I had been, the 15-year-old forced into a world she did not understand. I cried for the woman who had tried to please husbands who never loved her. I cried for the mother who had carried 18 children and lost 4 of them to the coldness of fate. I cried for every night I had been told to be strong while feeling myself fade. I cried for every prayer I had prayed without understanding, for every fear I had swallowed, for every moment I had believed I was unworthy of joy. When the storm of tears finally slowed, I realized something strange. My heart no longer felt cramped. It felt open. Like a door had been quietly unlocked inside me. And in that opening I felt a pull, not from guilt, not from duty, but from a gentle presence that felt closer than breath. That presence felt like the man in white. It felt like the voice in my dream. It felt like Jesus. My hands trembled as I wiped my face. I had never spoken to God in my own words before. That was not how I was raised. We recited, we repeated, we followed. But this night, I felt as though I would suffocate if I didn't speak from the deepest part of myself. So I took a slow breath, closed my eyes, and whispered the first honest prayer of my entire life. Ya Rab, if the man I saw was truly Jesus, if he is real, if he is the one who called my name, then please, reveal yourself to me clearly. I don't want tricks. I don't want emotions. I don't want to fool myself. I only want the truth. If you are truly calling me, then show me. My voice shook as I spoke. I felt like a child, unsure, vulnerable, fragile. But instead of fear, I felt a warmth spread slowly through me, starting from my chest and moving outward like a soft wave. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, it wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, steady, and impossibly comforting. A warmth that felt like being held, like being understood, like being seen for the first time in my life. I whispered again, Jesus, if you are real, speak to me. Silence followed. A quiet so deep it felt alive. And then, in that silence, without any sound, without any visible form, without anything I could touch or see, I felt words pressed softly into my heart. You are my daughter. My breath caught. My body froze. I didn't hear it with my ears. It was deeper than sound. It was as though the words glowed inside me, filling cracks I didn't know existed. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. But then the warmth grew stronger, wrapping around me like a cloak. And I felt it again, even gentler this time. I have seen your tears. I have counted your sorrows. You are mine. A sob escaped me, not of pain, but of relief so intense it felt holy. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat thudding beneath my palm. I felt like someone had finally found the pieces of me I had lost over the years and was putting them back together with tenderness I had never experienced. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand the doctrines. I didn't know what my life would become. But at that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the palace. Not the rules. Not the fear. Not the expectations. Not even my past. For the first time, I felt loved. Not used, not obligated, not owned, but loved. I whispered into the silence, if you have chosen me, then I choose you. And when I spoke those words, something inside me settled into place like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat quieted. My mind stopped racing. A calm unlike anything I had ever known flooded me. I felt like I was sitting in still water, the same still water from my vision, the same place where the man in white had stood waiting for me. I realized then that I no longer felt alone. Not even a little. Not even in the smallest corner of my soul. I felt held, surrounded, embraced from the inside out. I felt like someone had wrapped light around my broken places. And in that moment, I understood something fully for the first time in my life. God had heard me. God had seen me. God had answered me. Not because of rituals. Not because of rules. Not because of perfection. But because He loved me. And that night, in the privacy of my quiet room, with no witnesses, no ceremonies, and no expectations surrounding me, I whispered the most honest words I had ever spoken. Jesus, I am yours. And from that moment, everything inside me began to change. I never imagined that the peace I found in my room that night would so quickly collide with the storm that awaited me outside its doors. For days, I held the truth quietly inside me, carrying it like a fragile flame I was terrified someone would extinguish. The warmth in my heart remained, steady and alive, but I knew that speaking of it aloud in my world was not simple. It was dangerous. It was unthinkable. Yet hiding it felt like suffocating. Every time I looked at my children, every time they ran into my arms, every time I kissed their foreheads, I felt the truth pulling at me gently, whispering, "Tell the truth, even if they do not understand." The moment finally came one early afternoon. My father summoned me. His voice was tense, clipped, almost cold. I knew that tone too well. It meant someone had spoken to him. Someone had seen something. Someone had sensed the change in me. My heart tightened, but I walked toward his chamber with a strange steadiness, the same steadiness I had felt since that night Jesus called me his. When I entered the room, my father was already standing. He rarely stood unless something serious was weighing on him. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he did not greet me as he usually did. He did not ask me to sit. He simply stared at me with eyes that were searching. Not gently, not lovingly, but sharply, like he was trying to see whether I was still the daughter he thought I was. He said my name slowly, Zainab. "Yes, Baba," I replied, my voice softer than I expected. He took one step closer, then another, lowering his voice. "There are whispers, that you have been asking questions that no daughter of this house should ever ask." My heart began to pound, but I did not look away. I only sought the truth. He slammed his hand against the table beside him, the sound so loud it echoed off the marble walls. "Truth?" he snapped. "The truth has already been given to you from birth. The truth is in your blood, your name, your lineage, your faith. You do not search for what we have already placed in your hands." I inhaled slowly. "Baba, something happened to me." He narrowed his eyes. "What happened to you?" I hesitated. Not because I feared him, but because I knew that once I spoke these words, the life I knew would end. There would be no going back. But hiding it felt like betraying the one who saved me. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice did not when I finally said, "I saw him." His expression froze. "Saw who?" "Jesus," I whispered. "I saw him in a vision. And I believe in him." For a moment, everything was silent. Not even the guards outside shifted. The air felt heavy, as though the entire palace held its breath. Then my father's face twisted into something I had never seen before, rage mixed with disbelief, disappointment mixed with horror. "You, what?" he said, each word sharp enough to cut. "I believe in him," I repeated softly. "He saved me. He spoke to me. He—" Before I could finish, his hand flew through the air, striking my cheek so hard my head snapped to the side. It was the first time in my life my father had ever hit me. The sting burned across my skin, but what hurt far more was the look in his eyes, the look of a man who no longer recognized his own child. "You shame me," he shouted. "You shame this family. You shame every ancestor buried under this land. Do you understand what you have done?" I lifted my hand to my cheek, still throbbing, but I did not step back. "Baba, please. Do not call me that," he roared. "You speak the name of a foreign god in my house?" I tried to steady my breathing. "Jesus is not foreign to the heart. He came to me when—" "Silence," he shouted so loudly the guards outside flinched. "You have brought dishonor that cannot be washed away. Do you want us to be mocked? Do you want our enemies to laugh at us? A royal daughter abandoning her faith? Do you know what they will say about us?" I swallowed hard. I did not leave God. I found him. His eyes burned with fury. "You speak poison. You speak of betrayal. You think you have found light? You are lost. You are confused. You are sick. I am healed, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. He pointed at me with shaking hands. I will not allow this madness in my house. You will repent immediately, you will renew your declaration of faith, you will cleanse yourself, and you will never again speak this name. I cannot do that. He stepped closer until he was inches from my face. If you refuse, his voice lowered into something cold, deadly, then you will face punishment. Severe punishment. I felt fear surge through me, but another feeling rose above it, truth. Truth steadier than fear. Truth is stronger than threats. I met his eyes with trembling courage. Baba. I cannot deny what I know. I cannot deny what I saw. I cannot deny who called me. Even if you punish me, even if I lose everything. I cannot lie. Before he could respond, I heard crying behind me. Small crying. Broken crying. I turned, and there they were, my children. All those who were old enough to walk had gathered in the doorway, their little faces pale with fear, their eyes wide, tears rolling down their cheeks. They must have heard everything. My heart broke instantly. My eldest daughter rushed toward me first, throwing herself into my arms. Ummi, please, she sobbed. Please don't leave us. My youngest son tugged on my dress, crying, Don't go, Mama. Another daughter hid her face in my sleeve, shaking uncontrollably. They didn't understand what was happening. All they knew was that the voices were loud, the air was tense, and their mother was crying. I knelt on the floor to hold them, gathering as many of them into my arms as I could. Their small bodies pressed against me, warm, trembling, desperate. Tears poured down my face as I kissed their heads one by one. I am not leaving you, I whispered through my tears. I love you. I will always love you. My father looked at me with disgust. Do not poison their minds with your foolishness. I shook my head, still holding my children. I am not poisoning them. I am telling them the truth. I am telling them that their mother has found peace. Peace? He scoffed. You call this chaos peace? I met his eyes again. The chaos was my life before him. My children clung to me tighter, crying louder. One daughter climbed into my lap, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Ummi, please, don't make grandfather angry. Please just say what he wants. Her words stabbed my heart. Habibti, I whispered, cupping her cheeks, I cannot lie. Even for peace. Even for safety. Even for love. Because the one who spoke to me. He is the truth. And I cannot deny him. My father turned away, gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. Enough, he said through clenched teeth. Take the children out. My children screamed when the guards approached. No. Don't take me. I want Mama. Ummi. Ummi. Please, please, don't leave us. I tried to hold them, but the guards gently pried their hands from my clothes. The children fought desperately, crying, clawing, reaching for me as they were carried away one by one. The sound of their screams felt like knives in my chest. I reached out my hand toward them, my own voice breaking. I love you. Mama loves you. I am here. They disappeared around the corner, their cries fading but echoing through the hall like a wound that would never close. When the silence finally fell, I remained kneeling on the floor, my hands trembling in the empty air where my children had been only seconds before. My heart felt torn open, raw and bleeding. My father looked at me with a face full of anger, disappointment, and something that looked almost like fear. You have chosen your path, he said. Now face its consequences. I lifted my head slowly, tears still falling, but my voice steady. I chose the truth. And even as my world began to crumble, even as the door closed behind my crying children, even as my father's threats filled the room like shadows, I felt one thing remain unbroken inside me, a quiet, unwavering certainty. I was not alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. I never imagined that the decision to follow the truth would lead me into the night like a hunted creature, running not for power or honor, but for my life. After my confession to my father, the palace changed instantly. Every hallway felt colder, every guard watched me more closely, every servant lowered their eyes as though looking at me could pull them into my punishment. I knew what was coming. I knew the laws. I knew the consequences. It was only a matter of time before my father made a final decision about what to do with a daughter who dared to choose a path outside the one he gave her. But what I did not expect was the help that came quietly, softly, like a whisper of hope slipping under a locked door. It was the same Christian maid who had given me the Gospel of John. She approached me one evening when the palace was unusually silent. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was resolve there too. She slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand, pressing my fingers around it. "You must leave," she whispered. "Tonight." I froze. "Leave? How?" "The palace is surrounded. There are people waiting," she said softly. "People who help those who have visions like yours. You are not the first." My heart pounded. "But my children?" She looked down, pain filling her face. "You cannot take them. Not now." The sentence felt like a blow. My breath caught, and I closed my eyes, fighting the wave of agony that surged through me. To leave my children in order to save my life felt like tearing my soul in half. I thought of their faces, their little hands reaching for me as the guards carried them away. The sound of their cries still echoed in me. But the maid placed her hand over mine gently. "If you die here," she whispered, "your children lose you forever. If you live, there may come a day when you can fight for them." Her words cut deep, but they also planted a small, trembling seed of courage. That night, everything moved quickly. When the palace slept, the maid returned. She wrapped me in a plain black abaya, pulling the veil low over my face. Not a princess's fabric, no gold, no embroidery, just a garment meant to erase identity. We walked silently through the servants' passages, places I had never stepped before. The air felt thick with shadows, and every creak of the floor made my heart race. When we reached the courtyard, my breath caught. For the first time in my life, I was stepping into the world as someone who no longer belonged anywhere. A small gate near the stables opened, and two men waited in the darkness. Their faces were hidden, but their voices were gentle when they spoke. "Princess Zainab?" Hearing my name spoken with kindness at a moment when kindness was so scarce brought tears to my eyes. I nodded. "Come quickly," one whispered. "Your father's order has already begun circulating. Soldiers will search for you." My knees weakened. The consequences were moving faster than I had feared. We slipped through the gate and into the dark desert night. A car was hidden behind a cluster of date palms. As we ran toward it, I heard a sound that nearly made me collapse, a small voice calling from behind me. "Ummi?" I turned so fast my veil almost slipped. There, standing just outside the servants' gate, was my eldest daughter. Her hair was messy, her face flushed, her eyes filled with terror and desperate love. "Ummi," she whispered again, running toward me. I caught her in my arms, burying my face in her hair, breathing her in as if memorizing her scent could keep me alive. Tears streamed down my cheeks, soaking her shoulder. "Habibti, my precious girl, what are you doing here?" My voice broke. "I heard them talking," she cried. "They said you would be punished. They said you might," her voice cracked completely. "I don't want you to die." My heart shattered. I cupped her face, wiping her tears though my own wouldn't stop. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "You are brave. You are strong. You are everything I ever hoped you would be. And I love you with every part of me. Then take me, she pleaded. Please take me with you. I felt the words like a knife twisting inside me. I can't, I choked. If I take you, they will hurt us both. But if I live, one day I will find a way. I promise you. I promise. She was sobbing now, her small body shaking in my arms. Don't go. I kissed her forehead over and over. Never forget that I love you. Never forget who you are. And never believe for a moment that I left because I didn't want you. I am leaving because I want to live, so I can come back for you. One of the men stepped forward gently. We must go. Now. I held her face one last time. Go inside, I whispered. Hide. Be safe. And know that your mother is praying for you every moment. With trembling steps, she backed away, her sobs quiet but piercing. I felt like my soul was being pulled out of my body with every step she took away from me. When the car doors closed behind me, I pressed my forehead to the window, watching her small figure disappear into the shadows. That image is carved into me forever. The car sped through the desert roads, headlights off to avoid attention. At every checkpoint, my heart threatened to burst. The man beside me prayed silently. I prayed too, not with words, but with desperate breaths. There were moments when we had to stop and wait in total darkness, moments when a helicopter's distant hum made us hide beneath a rocky outcrop, moments when the sound of engines in the distance made all of us freeze. Each minute felt like a lifetime. Eventually, lights appeared on the horizon, the embassy. A place beyond my father's reach. A place where punishment could not follow me. When the gates opened and armed guards waved us inside, my chest collapsed with a sob I could not hold in. For the first time in my life, I stepped out of a car not as a princess, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a fugitive, and a free woman. The embassy workers guided me inside, and the moment the doors closed behind me, a small group of Christians gathered around me, forming a quiet circle. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others bowed their heads. I looked around, overwhelmed. Why are you doing this? I whispered. A woman stepped forward. Because he loves you, she said softly. And now, we do too. I broke into tears, tears of heartbreak, fear, and the faintest shimmer of hope. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who risked everything for me, I realized something with absolute certainty. I had lost my home, my father, my status, and even my children. But I had not lost God. And for the first time in my life, I felt the quiet strength of freedom settle inside me like a promise. When the doors of the small house church closed behind me, I felt as if I had stepped into another world, one where fear did not chase my footsteps and no one demanded perfection from me. It was a simple room, nothing like the marble halls of the palace I had lived in all my life. The walls were plain. The floor was bare. The lamps were dim. And yet, it felt warmer than any throne room I had ever stood in. People greeted me softly, as though they knew how fragile my heart had become. They called me sister. No titles. No royal terms. Just, sister. I had never belonged to something so gentle. A woman led me to a small pool in the center of the room. It wasn't grand, just still water in a stone basin. But to me, it looked deeper than oceans. I stood at the edge, trembling. Not because I feared what would happen, but because somehow I knew that stepping into that water meant leaving behind everything I once called life. Every tradition. Every expectation. Every identity that had been forced onto me, princess, daughter, wife, mother, symbol of honor. All of it was dissolving, like sand slipping between fingers. They asked if I wished to say a few words. My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't speak. So much pain had filled me over the years that my voice had grown used to silence. But suddenly, it rose inside me. And I heard myself whisper, I have been searching for peace since I was a child, and now I have found the one who called my name. My tears fell before the water even touched me. I stepped down into the basin. The water rose around my legs, then my waist. It was warm, warm like a mother's embrace, warm like the desert sun at dawn, warm like the man in white who stood beside still water in my vision. I closed my eyes, and my heart beat so fast I thought it would break through my chest. The pastor placed a hand on my shoulder. Zainab, he said softly, do you believe that Jesus is Lord? I could barely breathe. But I nodded. He found me. He called me. How could I not believe? He smiled, the kind of smile that holds no judgment, no agenda, no fear. Then in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we baptize you. He lowered me into the water. For a brief moment, just a moment, I felt weightless. Weightless in body, weightless in heart. It was as though all the pain I carried, all the questions I buried, all the tears I hid were pouring out of me and disappearing into the water. My past washed over my skin like a farewell. I almost wondered if I would rise again the same woman I had been. But when I came out of the water, I knew I was not the same. The air hit my face, cool and new. My chest loosened, my hands opened, and suddenly, I was sobbing, not from sorrow, but from a freedom so full it frightened me. I covered my face, but my voice escaped anyway, raw and loud, trembling with truth. For the first time, I am free. The room erupted with prayer. Not loud prayers like the ones I had grown up hearing, these were tender, loving, almost like songs being whispered over a wounded heart. Hands rested lightly on my shoulders, on my back, on my arms, carefully, respectfully, reassuringly. No one commanded me. No one judged me. They just prayed. And I felt held. When the prayers ended, they wrapped me in a white cloth. I clutched it around myself as though it were armor, but it felt more like a promise. I sat down on a wooden bench, breathless, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the quiet inside me become peaceful instead of heavy. That night, I made 3 promises. First, I promised to give the rest of my life to helping women who lived inside the same invisible cages I once lived in, women taught to silence their pain, hide their wounds, measure their worth by obedience and pregnancy. Women who felt unseen no matter how much they gave. Second, I promised to speak for those who lived in fear because of their faith, believers like me who had walked away from everything they knew just to answer the voice that called them. And third, I promised to pray every single day for my 18 children. Every one of them. By name. By memory. By love. I knew they were crying somewhere far away, asking where their mother had gone. I knew they were being told lies about me. I knew they might grow up believing I abandoned them. But I also believed, deep inside my chest where pain had turned into courage, that the same God who reached into my storm would one day reach into theirs. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside with the white cloth still wrapped around me. The air smelled like dawn even though the sky was still dark. I looked up and inhaled, and something inside me felt lighter than it had ever felt. Ahead of me, beyond the rooftops, a gentle strip of light was rising. Soft. Golden. Alive. I walked toward it slowly, then steadily, then without fear. The sun rose higher, painting the horizon with colors I had never noticed before, colors that looked like hope, like healing, like beginnings. And for the first time in my life, I no longer walked as a princess trying to uphold a kingdom built on expectations. I walked as a daughter, his daughter, stepping into a new life that no one could take from me. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Mysterious Uplift. Have you ever experienced betrayal? Tell your story in the comments below.